Hello, my name is Rabbi Abram Goodstein, and I gave this sermon on May 7th. This week, we reach the last chapter of Leviticus. And most of Leviticus has been a law code and manual for priests. And we see these new rules established by God coalesce the Israelites into a nascent society. And as we turn now towards the conclusion of Leviticus, we come to this moment where God offers motivation for the Israelites to follow these new rules. And it starts out as your standard affair. God will bless you if you follow the rules, and those blessings include peace, fertility, and happiness. But when it comes to the part about the punishments, things get weird. If there are rewards for following the laws, then it should come to no surprise that there are also punishments. However, it's the intensity and creativity of these punishments that's so strange. In fact, our rabbinic ancestors found these passages from Leviticus 26 so alarming, they named this section Tochacha, which means the rebuke. As an example, if you don't obey my laws, says God, then I will wreak misery upon you, consumption and fever, which cause the eyes to pine and the body to languish. You shall sow your seed to no purpose, for your enemies shall eat it. And that's just like the first sentence of these curses. And it goes on in sadistic detail of exactly what God will do to the Israelites when they do not follow these laws. And so I'm frustrated by these curses for two reasons. The first reason is that God seems really triggered while listing these curses. Again and again, like a broken record, God reminds the Israelites how horrible it will be for them if they break the rules. And you just get the sense that a deceiving anger from God. And multiple times, God says, and if you refuse to obey me, I will go on smiting you sevenfold for your sins. And one would have hoped that God would have some emotional distance while contemplating proportional responses to sins. Instead, God decides to make a punishment as 7 times as bad as the misdeed, no matter the severity of the sin. And the second thing that frustrates me is why does God reserve so much creativity in punishing the Israelites? Why couldn't God be as imaginative with blessing the Israelites? Or why couldn't God be more devilishly creative in preventing the Israelites harm from their enemies? For example, God says, 10 women shall bake bread in a single oven. They shall dole out your bread by weight, and though you eat, you shall not be satisfied. What God could have said is that if y'all don't follow my rules, I will make you go hungry. Instead, God illustrates with strange detail how the famine will work. There will not be enough ovens. You will only eat a portion of a loaf of bread, and it won't fill you up. It just seems too cruel of a curse towards the people that God chooses. And it's a strange way to illustrate God's rebuke. So the salient question is, what are these verses even doing here? What is the Torah trying to convey by listing a series of creatively cruel curses about the Israelites? Well, there are some thoughts about this. Modern scholars are quick to point out that this kind of language was actually common in the ancient Near East. Babylonian, Hittite, and Assyrian texts all have versions of these rebukes as kings motivating their vassal states and conquered peoples to follow the rules. For me, this context is helpful and even meaningful because all around the Israelites are nations that have chosen a monarchy as their system of government. Meanwhile, the Israelites are forming a society devoid of a king, at least at the time they're wandering around the Sinai. So it's not surprising that their king would be Adonai, and that Adonai would take on some kingly characteristics. As Jews, we are comfortable with this, since God as king is most prominent in our blessings, which almost all start off with, "Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe." I normally say sovereign of the universe to be egalitarian. So this rebuke was a popular trend among ancient Near East kings. though it wasn't necessarily towards their subjects, but conquered nations and vassal states. And there's another way to look at these rebukes when one compares it to ancient Near Eastern monarchies. It was believed by these nations that the well-being of a nation was related to the behavior of its king. If the gods of these nations were pleased by a king, then the nations did well. If a nation did poorly, then their gods were displeased at their king. Of course, in our Torah, the metaphor is that God is like a king. They are essentially the same thing. So God may be doing something totally innovative here by inventing collective responsibility. There is no king to mess things up for the Israelites. Instead, each individual Israelite is responsible for their budding nation. And that's a lot to put on the shoulders of each Israelite. And of course, God makes it crystal clear what happens if an Israelite fails that responsibility. And while, as you can see, I dislike this section of the Torah, I kind of get it. We are a people who have understood collective responsibility for a long time. And that responsibility weighs heavy on us even today. God's rebuke is not just a warning, but an illustration of the powerful forces at play. Our tradition has influenced much of Western society, and yet as Jews, we are often in the minority and sometimes considered the other. And instead of receiving a thank you for the gift of monotheism, the 7-day week, and collective responsibility, we sometimes get persecuted instead. And maybe God understands this, and this is why God gets so triggered when rebuking us. It's as if God is saying, the stakes are high if you mess up. There's so much you're going to be responsible for. If you're not careful, these terrible things will happen to you. So in conclusion, I don't like these rebukes, but I'm still honored to be part of a tradition that has been given such an awesome responsibility. And this responsibility certainly weighs a lot, but it has also built a tradition full of beautiful practices and meaningful experiences. And this shared experience changed the Israelites into a society and us into a purposeful community. Thank you.